In a time long before villages, roads, or tools shaped by human hands, the world was nothing but forests stretching endlessly and rivers carving their way through untouched lands. People lived in small wandering groups, learning every day from the wind, the trees, and the quiet rules of nature. Night was feared, for darkness carried its own weight, and warmth was the most precious gift on earth. In one of the deep valleys surrounded by high mountains lived a tribe known as the People of Light. They had no grand shelters, no beasts of burden, only each other and the fire they guarded with their lives. Among them lived a quiet boy named Laro, small in size, gentle in voice, and unlike the other children who chased each other through the trees. Laro preferred to sit beside the river for hours, watching the sunlight shimmer across the surface like tiny pieces of moving gold. At night, instead of hiding from the shadows, he would step outside the circle of firelight and stare at the stars as if they whispered secrets only he could hear. One night, while the camp was silent and everyone was wrapped in sleep, Laro felt a strange pull deep inside his chest. It wasn't fear, nor was it curiosity. It felt like an invitation. Without truly knowing why, he stepped beyond the warm glow of the campfire and into the forest. The moonlight was faint, the air cool and damp, and little glowing insects moved like tiny lanterns guiding his steps. He walked for what felt like a long time until he reached a clearing he had never seen before. In its center sat a smooth white stone, shining with the soft light that did not come from the moon. Laro approached it slowly. When he placed his hand upon its cool surface, a warm pulse spread through him. Not hot like fire, but gentle, like someone placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Then he saw it, a figure made of dim light standing beside the stone. Not a human, not a creature, just a shape. It did not speak, yet images filled Laro's mind. People discovering fire, families gathering around it, children learning to survive its heat, and early humans understanding that fire was not only danger, but also life. The message was simple. Fire must be understood before it is used. It is a friend, not a tool. Laro returned to the camp before sunrise, his heart calm, his mind quiet. The next morning, the tribe gathered around the fire, surprised to see it still burning strongly despite the long night. Laro sat beside it with a peaceful expression, as if he had always belonged there. From that day on, Laro became the tribe's keeper of the flame. He learned to read the fire, not through words, but through the soft crackle of burning wood, the rhythm of sparks, and the rise and fall of its glow. He taught the tribe how to use fire gently, for warmth, for shaping tools, for drying hides. Children gathered around him every night, eager to hear him speak of light, warmth, and the whisper of the first fire. Years passed and Laro aged peacefully. Before he grew too old, he built a circle of stones in the center of the camp. A place he said would always hold the heart of the flame. The fire, he said, is a memory of the first light that did not come from the sun. Even after his death, the tribe never forgot him. His story lived in every spark, in every night warmed by the glow of fire. Seasons changed, children became adults. Yet the circle of stones Laro left behind remained the center of the tribe's life. One cold night, as fog drifted through the trees, a young boy appeared at the edge of the camp. No one knew him. His clothes were torn, his small body shivering from cold and exhaustion. The tribe welcomed him to the fire, offering warmth and food. When the boy sat near the flames, something strange happened. The fire calmed, glowed softly, and swayed toward him like a familiar friend. The tribe named him Child of Light, for the flames seemed to recognize him. Night after night, the boy sat near the fire, watching it closely. One evening, while the tribe slept, the flames shrank into a thin line of glowing embers. The boy leaned forward as if hearing a whisper no one else could hear. "The fire is afraid," he murmured suddenly. "It says cold winds are coming from beyond the second mountain. We must move." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Moving during the start of winter was risky, but their trust in the fire and in Laro's legacy was deep. They followed the boy's warning, leaving the valley behind. 3 days later, a violent winter storm struck the place where they once lived. They would not have survived it. From then on, the tribe knew the fire had chosen a new listener. Months passed. The Child of Light grew stronger, calmer, and more connected to fire than anyone since Laro. Then one night, as he sat beside the flames, he whispered to the elder, "The fire speaks of a path, a stone like the first one, far beyond the mountain." At dawn, a small group set out. The Child of Light, the elder, 3 hunters, and an old woman who carried Laro's stories in her heart. They walked through forests soaked in morning dew, crossed rivers cold as stone, and entered a narrow rocky pass where the air felt still, too still. The boy stopped, touching the ground. "The mountain breathes," he said. The group followed him into a hidden cave. Inside it stood a massive white stone, brighter and larger than the one Laro had touched as a child. As the boy approached, soft light pulsed through the cavern. A silhouette of dim light appeared above the stone. Familiar, silent, and ancient, it filled their minds with visions of fire shared between generations, of warmth carried through ages, of children learning from children, and of wisdom that moves like a flame from one heart to another. When they left the cave, the boy seemed changed, not older, but deeper. That night, when they lit the fire back at camp, the flame rose straight upward, paused, and bent gently toward the Child of Light, as if greeting him. No one spoke a word. They all understood. A new keeper had been chosen, and the story of the first fire's shadow lived on, whispered in the embers, carried in the warmth of every flame, teaching each new generation that fire is not merely light. It is memory, it is guidance, it is the oldest friend humans have ever known. After the fire had bent toward him that night, the child of light felt a gentle warmth inside, as if the flame itself had accepted him. He knew then that his journey would not end with the cave or the circle of stones. Each day offered a lesson, and each night held a new whisper from the fire. The next morning he woke to the mist curling over the camp. Tiny droplets clung to the leaves like beads of glass. He stepped barefoot onto the soft forest floor, feeling each texture beneath him, the moss, the dirt, the fallen leaves, and he realized that the forest itself was alive with knowledge. Every sound, every scent was part of a language he could almost understand. For several days, the child of light led the elders and the hunters to hidden places where berries grew in abundance, where small animals left footprints near streams, and where the sun broke through the canopy to warm patches of earth. He discovered which plants could be eaten raw, which could be boiled for warmth and energy, and which were dangerous. The tribe learned not only to survive, but to live gently within the forest. One evening, as the group sat around a small fire, the child of light noticed sparks rising unusually high. He felt a tug in his chest, an instinct urging him to look upward. Above, the stars were bright, but one shimmered differently, steady, constant, as if guiding him. Without hesitation, he stood and pointed. "The fire shows us a path," he said softly. The elders nodded in silence. They had learned to trust him without question. That night, guided by the glow of embers and the whisper of the wind, the tribe moved to a hidden valley at the edge of the forest. Here the fire burned brighter than ever. It lit not only the camp, but the hearts of all who gathered around it. Days turned into weeks. The child of light continued to teach the younger children, showing them how to feed the fire, how to listen to it, and how to respect it. Each lesson was quiet and deliberate, like a gentle rhythm of breath. He showed them that fire could be more than survival. It could carry stories, hope, and warmth across generations. Then came the first winter with snow thick enough to blanket the forest in silence. The rivers froze, and the wind whispered like distant drums. The tribe huddled together under animal hides, and the fire became their lifeline. The child of light carefully fed it small twigs, damp moss, and dry leaves. He watched the flame flicker, observing its dance, learning from every twist and curve. And the fire in return seemed to shimmer brighter with each act of care. By the time spring arrived, the forest was alive again with new growth. The tribe had learned to store food, build temporary shelters, and move quietly through the trees. And everywhere they went, the fire remained their guide. Children carried small embers in clay bowls, whispering Laro's old stories and adding the child of light's lessons. Years passed, and the boy grew taller, wiser, though his eyes still held the calm innocence of a child. He walked between the trees as if he belonged to the forest itself. And wherever he went, the fire's glow followed, not in flames, but in warmth, in understanding, in connection. People came from other valleys, curious about the boy who could speak to fire and teach its secrets. And quietly he showed them that the fire was not a weapon, not a threat. It was a friend to those who listened. The boy was born during a time when the world trembled under the weight of endless war. China was not yet a country, only a land of kingdoms constantly fighting, betraying, and swallowing one another. In the western capital of Qin on a cold winter night, a child opened his eyes for the first time, eyes that would one day watch an entire nation bow before him. His name was Ying Zheng. He grew up inside the palace, but it was no place of comfort. A palace is a battlefield made of silk and whispers, and the boy learned early that danger hid behind every smile. Servants bowed politely while exchanging looks filled with secrets. Ministers spoke softly while plotting loudly in their hearts. Even his own mother seemed to carry shadows in her gaze, as if she feared something he could not yet understand. Because he was born to a powerful family, Zheng did not know ordinary childhood. There were no games in the fields, no running in the streets, no friends shouting his name. Instead, he learned to walk while soldiers watched him, learned to speak while politicians studied him. Every day, lessons filled his hours, reading, strategy, maps, rituals, manners, and the harsh truth of rulership. But the boy's mind was quick and sharp. He listened more than he spoke. He watched more than he played. He remembered more than anyone expected. Often he would wander to the palace balconies at night, staring at the mountains far beyond the walls. Lanterns flickered in the wind while he tried to imagine what life looked like outside the kingdom of stone and fear. As he grew older, he began noticing the tension around him. His father, King Zhuangxiang of Qin, rarely visited him. Court ministers whispered about the wars, about the other 6 kingdoms that dreamed of destroying Qin. Spies were captured, plots uncovered, assassins stopped at the last moment, and sometimes late at night, Zheng heard his mother crying behind the silk curtains. The boy did not understand everything then, but he understood this. Power was fragile. Life was fragile. A king could die as easily as a commoner. When Zheng turned 13, the world changed with brutal speed. His father, the king, died suddenly. Rumors spread like wildfire, poison, conspiracy, betrayal. But no one said it aloud. The throne became his, but the crown felt heavier than the world itself. He was only a child, and yet the fate of millions now rested in his hands. The ministers ran the government on his behalf, but what they truly did was pull the strings while pretending to serve him. Some underestimated him because of his young age. Others feared him because of what he represented, the future of a kingdom destined for greatness. Zheng, however, remained silent. He watched, he learned, he waited. While the ministers fought for control, the young king spent days reading ancient books about leadership, war, and philosophy. He spent nights alone on the high platforms of the palace, looking out toward the great wall that stretched like a stone dragon across the mountains. He imagined expanding it, strengthening it, turning it into a shield that would protect all who lived behind it. Then came the moment that shaped him forever. One morning he looked down from a palace balcony and saw crowds of common people gathered in the courtyard. They were crying, mourning war, hunger, poverty. Their homes had burned in distant battles. Their families were broken. Their lives had been shaped by fear long before his birth. For the first time, Zheng felt something powerful awaken inside him. Not fear, not confusion, but purpose. He understood what he needed to do. He would unite the land. He would end the wars. He would build a nation strong enough to survive any storm. But to do that, he needed real power, his own, not borrowed. Over the years, Zheng began removing the corrupt ministers who manipulated the throne. Some he exiled, some he imprisoned, and some simply vanished from the palace halls, never to be seen again. His rule became stronger, and soon the boy king grew into a leader feared by enemies and respected by allies. When he reached adulthood, he gathered his generals and pointed toward the eastern horizon. "There," he said, "lies a divided world. We will unite it." And so began the greatest campaign in Chinese history. One by one, the other 6 kingdoms fell. Qi, Chu, Yan, Wei, Han, Zhao. Each fell before his armies, before his discipline, before his relentless desire to create something larger than any kingdom had ever dreamed. His soldiers called him a visionary. His enemies called him a monster. But Zheng paid no attention to the voices of praise or hate. He cared only for the future. When the wars finally ended, China, once fractured, wounded, and exhausted, stood united for the first time in history. Farmers who once fled their homes returned to their fields. Merchants traveled along roads built under the king's orders. Armies that once killed each other now marched together under one banner. Ying Zheng took a new title, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. As emperor, he created laws that applied to everyone equally. From the poorest farmer to the highest noble, he unified coins, measures, writing systems, and roads. And he expanded the Great Wall, turning it into an enormous shield for the empire. But the emperor's childhood never left him. The fear, the loneliness, the shadows. These memories shaped him more than any battlefield. He grew cautious, suspicious, determined to protect his empire from the chaos that had haunted his early years. Many feared him. Some loved him. All obeyed him. In his final days, he traveled through the empire he built, watching children play in places where blood once flowed. Seeing them made him think of the boy he once was. The frightened child in the palace, surrounded by secrets. He realized then that his legacy was not his name, not his armies, not even the Great Wall. His legacy was his creation of a nation that would continue long after he turned to dust. And so, when he finally died on a lonely road far from the capital, he left behind a China united, standing like a mountain in the wind, a monument to a boy who climbed from fear to greatness. Although the world saw an ambitious young king, only a few knew the inner storms swirling inside Ying-jung. His childhood had taught him that trust was dangerous, that kindness could be used as a weapon, and that anyone, even family, could turn into a threat when power was involved. Yet, as he matured, something unexpected happened. The quiet boy who once wandered alone through palace corridors began to form bonds. Fragile at first, but real. One of those bonds was with General Wang Jian, an older man who had served under several kings. Wang Jian treated Zheng not as a puppet, nor as a child, but as someone capable of greatness. He spoke to him plainly, sometimes even bluntly. "The world doesn't unite with dreams," the general told him once. "It unites with strength, discipline, and the courage to make decisions no one else can bear." Zheng listened, and he remembered. Another influence was his advisor Li Si, a scholar who believed that a united land required order above all else. Li Si had studied the philosophies of the warring kingdoms and understood that people were unpredictable unless shaped by clear laws and firm leadership. "Your Majesty," he once said, "if you wish to create something eternal, you must first control what destroys civilizations, chaos, corruption, and weakness. A nation is not built by kindness alone." Zheng understood. He did not always agree, but he understood. Still, the greatest influence came from something far older and more silent than any person: the land itself. When Zheng traveled beyond the capital for the first time, he saw the mountains stretching endlessly like ancient guardians. He saw rivers cutting through valleys, feeding villages that barely survived the wars. He saw the Great Wall, partially built, winding across the peaks like a scar left by history's battles. Standing at the edge of a cliff one morning, Zheng felt the wind on his face and said in a whisper, "This land deserves peace, even if peace must be forced." The unification wars began soon after. Qin was powerful, disciplined, and feared, but Zheng did not rely solely on brute force. He used diplomacy, misinformation, bribes, strategic marriages, and psychological warfare. He turned enemies against each other, waited for their weaknesses to reveal themselves, and struck with precision. The people of Qin believed their young king was destined for greatness. The other kingdoms believed he was a merciless conqueror. Zheng himself believed only one thing: he was the answer to centuries of suffering. During these campaigns, he came face to face with the harsh realities of leadership. Villages burned during battles. Refugees fled by the thousands. Soldiers died with their names forgotten. Each night, reports of the dead arrived, and Zheng read every one of them, sometimes long after everyone else had slept. There were nights when he felt the weight of every life lost pressing on his chest. He remembered the faces of the crying villagers he had seen as a child, the grief, the hunger, the despair. And he told himself that the suffering of today was the price for the peace of tomorrow. But not everyone agreed. There were rebellions, betrayals, generals who turned against him, and spies who tried to assassinate him. 3 times he escaped death only through instinct and luck. Each attempt carved another scar into his heart, making him trust less and stand alone more. When the 6th Kingdom finally fell and the land stood united, the celebrations echoed across China. Fires lit the mountains, bells rang in every city, children ran in the streets as families embraced. For the first time in centuries, the land felt still. Zheng stood above his army, watching the sea of people cheering below him, and for a moment he allowed himself to breathe. But power does not bring peace to the one who holds it. As emperor, he created laws, unified writing, standardized weights, and built new roads. He restructured the government and moved nobles from their home regions to the capital so they could not rise against him. The empire grew stronger, richer, and more organized than ever. But with each achievement came new fears. He feared rebellion. He feared betrayal. He feared that after all he had built, someone might tear it down. His mind returned to childhood memories. Whispers in dark corridors, plots behind silk curtains, the cold fear of uncertainty. Now, as ruler of millions, he carried those fears multiplied 1,000 times. He became stricter, more cautious, less forgiving. Some said he was turning into the very thing he had destroyed, a tyrant. Yet whenever he traveled through the empire and saw children playing freely in market squares, farmers harvesting fields without the fear of soldiers invading, and merchants traveling safely across roads that once crossed battlefields, he knew he had done something righteous. The empire was now a living thing, growing, breathing, changing, and he was its guardian. Still, one question lingered in his mind, one he could not silence. Would all of this collapse after he died? He searched for answers everywhere, in scrolls, scholars, mountains, even legends. His fear of death grew, not because he loved life, but because he feared losing the future he had built. He sent expeditions seeking elixirs, met mystics who claimed to know the secrets of immortality, and studied ancient teachings. But deep down, he knew no emperor escapes time. On his final journey across the empire, the people lined the roads, bowing as he passed. Some were old enough to remember the wars before unification. Others were young, born into the peace he created. To them, he was more than a ruler. He was the man who changed the world. One night, as the caravan camped near the eastern sea, Zheng stood alone watching the waves crash onto the rocks. The moonlight shimmered on the water, turning the world silver and quiet. He remembered everything. The lonely palace corridors, the faces of the dead, the weight of the crown, the victories, the betrayals, the people crying for help, and the child who promised to end their suffering. For the first time in his life, he felt something close to peace. When he died days later, the servants tried to hide his death to avoid chaos. But the land he unified did not fall into civil war immediately. His laws, his structures, his vision, they held the empire together. Long after his passing, people would speak of him not with simple admiration or hatred, but with awe. He was a force of nature, a man who rose from childhood fear to reshape an entire civilization. And somewhere in the stories told around fires and in the halls of scholars, one truth remained. A boy once stood alone in a palace of shadows and became the light that united a nation. After the emperor's death, the world seemed to pause, as if unsure how to move without the man who had shaped it. His caravan continued its slow journey back toward the capital, concealing his lifeless body inside a sealed cart filled with fish to mask the scent. Only a handful of his closest attendants knew the truth, and each of them carried a heavy fear. For they knew what happened to empires when the center suddenly vanished. The emperor had built a system of laws strong enough to hold the empire together, but he had also ruled with the force of his personality, his vision, and the sheer gravity of his presence. Even in death, his shadow stretched across the land, touching cities he had never seen, villages he had once protected, and distant mountains that had stood long before his birth. While his body traveled in secret, the capital of Xianyang continued its daily rhythm. Merchants bargained in the markets, scholars debated philosophy in courtyards shaded by tall trees. Children practiced writing on wooden tablets, tracing characters that the emperor himself had standardized. Life moved, but beneath its surface, unease rippled like a dark current. Among the ministers, whispers spread. Who would succeed him? Would the laws remain? Would the empire survive? One evening, in a dim room lit by oil lamps, Li Si sat alone, studying the emperor's last decrees. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the realization that he was witnessing the turning of an age. He remembered the boy he had met decades earlier, the child king who had sat silently during their first meeting, absorbing every word like a sponge absorbing ink. Li Si had believed in him. He had shaped him, and he had feared him at times, but he had never doubted him. Now the emperor was gone, and the scholar felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. If we fail now, he whispered to himself, everything collapses. Yet somewhere far from the capital, another drama was unfolding, one that had begun years earlier, long before the emperor's final breath. Years before his death, the emperor had visited the mountainous region of the north. There he encountered a boy around 10 years old, standing alone on a rocky outcrop, watching the imperial procession pass below. He was thin, barefoot, and wore simple village clothing, But there was something unusual in his eyes. A sharpness, a clarity, as if he saw more than the world showed. The emperor stopped his caravan. "Bring the boy to me," he commanded. When the child stood before him, he did not bow. Instead, he stared directly at the emperor, unafraid. The soldiers tensed, but Zheng raised a hand. "What is your name?" he asked. "Jian," the boy replied firmly. "And why do you watch us from the cliffs?" "I wanted to see if the stories were true." "What stories?" "That the emperor is a man who carries the world on his back." The emperor did not smile often, but something about the child stirred a memory within him. A memory of himself staring down from high balconies at a world he wished to change. "Do you believe the stories?" he asked. Jian shrugged. "I believe a man is what he does, not what people say." Zheng studied him longer than anyone expected, a spark, a mirrored reflection of his younger self. A child who had already learned that truth lay in action, not words. Without a second thought, he ordered the boy to be brought to the palace, to be educated, trained, refined. Many ministers protested. Some feared the child would become a danger. Others whispered about omens and destiny. But Zheng had made up his mind. He saw in Jian something raw, powerful, and rare, something the empire would one day need. And so the child from the mountains became a silent witness to the emperor's final years. After Zheng's death, Jian was no longer just a child. He was a young man now, trained in weapons, philosophy, and statecraft. He knew more about the empire than most ministers. He had walked beside the emperor through villages and military camps, watched him judge disputes, watched him shape the land with ruthless logic. Now he stood in the palace courtyard, staring up at the sky, as if waiting for a sign. He felt the emperor's passing before the news reached the capital. It was not magic, not intuition, but the sudden stillness he felt deep within. The quiet ending of a presence that had guided him for years. When the ministers finally announced the death, the empire shook. Nobles began scheming, generals positioned their armies, envoys rushed to secure alliances. And Li Si watched the entire storm unfold with growing dread. But in the middle of this chaos stood Jian. He remembered the emperor's quiet words to him on their last journey together. "One day, Jian, this land will need someone who understands what unity cost us. Someone who knows what peace demands." At the time, he hadn't fully understood. Now he did. Because peace, he realized, was not a resting place. It was a responsibility. The empire the emperor had built was strong, but strength could shatter if left in careless hands. Jian knew that if he stepped away, others would tear at the structure for their own gain. He thought of the emperor's face that day on the mountains, studying him with unusual intensity. He remembered the weight of his gaze. He remembered the unspoken question in it. Will you be the one to continue what I began? Jian clenched his fists. He had never desired power, but he could not turn away from duty. Your Majesty, he whispered into the wind, I understand now. But this was only the beginning. The struggle for succession was about to erupt. Generals would rise, ministers would scheme, the empire would tremble again. And Jian, the boy born on a cliff, the child the emperor once chose from obscurity, was about to step into the center of a storm that would decide the future of China. His story had only just begun. The news of the emperor's death cracked across the empire like a bolt of lightning. Though the ministers tried to announce it with careful ceremony, nothing could contain the shock. The first emperor had seemed unstoppable, immortal even. His will had shaped mountains, redirected rivers, raised walls that touched the sky. To imagine the world without him felt like imagining the sky without the sun. In the palace, chaos brewed beneath the surface. The ministers stood in stiff formation during the official mourning ceremony, but behind their expressionless faces, their minds raced in all directions. Who would take the throne? Who would control the armies? Who would inherit the emperor's unfinished vision? Not everyone wanted the empire to remain united. Some noble families longed for the days when each region ruled itself. Some generals saw opportunity in the confusion, and some ministers, drunk on ambition, believed they deserved more power now that the giant who overshadowed them was gone. Meanwhile, the emperor's son, the rightful heir, was young, inexperienced, and easily influenced. He was nothing like his father. Where the emperor had been sharp-eyed and decisive, the prince was gentle, uncertain, shaped by scholars and courtiers who protected him from harsh truths. In the dim corridors of the palace, rumors swirled like smoke. The empire won't hold. The generals will revolt. The nobles will break free. War will return. And in the middle of this storm stood Jian. He watched the unfolding chaos with a steady gaze, one learned not from books, but from years spent beside the emperor. Riding with him through flooded villages, listening to him speak with grieving families, studying maps with him late into the night, watching him make impossible decisions with a clenched jaw and eyes full of responsibility. While the ministers argued and schemed, Jian remained silent. But silence in times like this was dangerous. And soon, someone noticed him. Li Si summoned Jian to a private hall deep within the palace. It was a narrow chamber with stone walls, a single table, and a window that looked out onto a small pond. The room was simple, but its simplicity made it all the more intimidating. Li Si sat with his hands folded, his expression unreadable. "You felt it, didn't you?" the old scholar asked. Jian nodded. Before the announcement, yes. Li Si studied him for a long moment. The emperor saw something in you. Saw it from the moment he stopped his entire procession to speak to you on that cliff. Jian remained silent. He never asked why the emperor had chosen him. He had simply accepted the honor, grateful but uncertain. Li Si continued, his voice lower. The empire is in danger. The nobles are mobilizing their influence. The generals are sharpening their blades. The emperor's son is young and easily swayed. Do you believe he cannot rule? Jian asked. Li Si exhaled slowly. I believe he can sit on the throne. But can he hold an empire together? That I do not know. The room fell silent. Jian felt something stir in his chest. Fear, duty, and a quiet sense of inevitability. Why call me here? Jian finally asked. Li Si leaned closer. Because the emperor trusted you. And because the empire needs someone with his clarity of vision. Jian's heart tightened. I am not a prince. I do not seek the throne. No, Li Si said softly. But you are a voice the new emperor will listen to if you choose to guide him. Jian frowned. Guide him? Or rule through him? Li Si did not answer for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an old man's weariness. I seek only what will keep the empire from collapsing. If that requires strength behind the throne, then so be it. Jian looked away, troubled. The idea of power unsettled him. It reminded him too much of the ministers who had once preyed upon the emperor's youth. He refused to become like them, a shadow manipulating a crown. Yet he also knew this. If no one stepped forward, the empire would fracture. War would return, villages would burn. Children would cry as he once had seen long ago. Duty pressed on him like 1,000 mountains. After a long silence, Jian said, I will protect the empire, but I will not become a puppeteer. Li Si nodded with relief, but also with the understanding that Jian's path would now be more dangerous than ever. Outside the palace, unrest simmered. In the far eastern provinces, a powerful noble family began gathering private soldiers. On the northern borders, a general stationed with 50,000 troops hesitated to swear loyalty to the new emperor. In wealthy southern cities, merchants discussed whether taxes would remain the same, or whether new opportunities would arise from instability. All waited, all watched, all tested the boundaries of unity. They believed the new emperor would be weak. They believed the empire would eventually crumble. And so, Jian realized, the legacy of the man who had changed the world now stood on a fragile edge. The first emperor had united China, but unity was not a gift, it was a responsibility, and responsibilities must be protected. Late one night, Jian stood atop the palace walls, staring at the distant torchlights scattered across the empire. The breeze carried the scent of incense from the morning halls. The moon hung low, glowing faintly behind thin clouds. Jian closed his eyes and replayed the emperor's final words to him. A message spoken softly during their last journey together. When I am gone, the world will test you. Not because you seek power, but because you carry the burden of understanding. Remember this, Jian. Peace survives only when someone is willing to defend it. The words echoed through him like a heartbeat. He opened his eyes again, sharper, more determined. The Empire had entered its most dangerous chapter, and whether he wanted it or not, Jian would stand at its center. His next steps would decide the fate of millions. It did not begin with a sound, nor with a shadow. It began with a feeling, a cold, heavy sensation that settled on the chests of everyone who stepped into that place. No one knew why the old sanctuary breathed like a living heart, nor why its walls whispered when no one spoke. But the judge knew, or at least he pretended to. He stood at the entrance of the gray corridor, a corridor that seemed endless. Beside him walked Nusa, whose eyes carried both fear and curiosity. An unusual combination for someone entering a place like this. The floor beneath them was covered with a thin layer of ash, soft and cold, forming small spirals whenever the air trembled. And the air did tremble often, because the sanctuary had its own pulse, a pulse that felt like the heartbeat of something ancient, something that was not meant to be awakened. They walked deeper. The judge did not look back, nor did he speak. Nusa finally broke the silence. Why are we here exactly? The judge's voice was low yet steady. To witness, to understand, and perhaps to survive. She stopped for a moment. Survive what? He didn't answer, because at that very moment the corridor itself responded. A long, slow vibration shivered through the stone, then faded. Nusa felt a cold shiver down her spine. "This place is alive," she whispered. "No," the judge corrected her softly. "It is aware." They continued forward until they reached a large hall. A hollow chamber shaped like a circle with 7 pillars surrounding a center filled with ash. In the middle lay a small creature, crouched and trembling. Nusa gasped. It was not human, nor fully animal. Its small black eyes reflected the lowest light like pools of ink. The judge approached it carefully. "This is the witness," he murmured. The creature blinked slowly, then it raised a finger, thin, bone-like, and pointed upward. Nusa followed its gesture. Above them, shadows moved, not ordinary shadows, not shadows cast by light. These were alive. At first, they couldn't see shapes clearly, only massive dark forms stretching across the ceiling. Breathing, shifting, observing. A deep rumbling began, like the echo of a giant inhaling. Nusa whispered, terrified, Is that the entity?" The judge nodded once. "The entity that remembers everything and forgets nothing." Suddenly the small creature, the witness, let out a sharp cry that cut through the hall like a blade. It was not a cry of fear. It was a warning. The ash began to swirl violently, forming spirals that rose into the air, spinning around the judge and Noosa. The pillars vibrated. Then, from deep within the shadows above, two massive red eyes opened, not glowing, burning. The judge pulled a worn manuscript from his robe. Noosa saw symbols carved into its surface. Symbols that seemed to move like living ink. "It's time," he said. The witness creature curled up in fear. The shadows descended an inch. Noosa stepped back. "What is happening?" The judge held the manuscript higher. "It wants this. That's why it followed us." She stared at him. "You mean it wasn't after us?" "No," he whispered bitterly. "It wants what we carry, not who we are." As he opened the manuscript, a faint white light leaked from between the pages. Then the light grew, slowly, like a waking flame, but the shadows above them recoiled. The judge shouted, "Place it in the center, hurry!" Noosa ran into the circle of ash. The witness screeched again. The ground began to pulse beneath her feet. She dropped the manuscript into the center of the circle, and the moment it touched the ash, the hall erupted with light. A burst of black fire, dark but luminous, shot upward, striking the ceiling and splitting the shadows apart. And from the manuscript, a tiny black bird emerged, not made of flesh, but of shimmering black light. Its wings left trails of smoke that glittered like stars. It hovered, watching Noosa, then flew straight toward the entity above. The shadows trembled. All the red eyes blinked at once. The bird rose higher, higher, until it met the entity face to face. And then, a silent explosion of black radiance filled the chamber. Everything shook. Ash flew everywhere. The judge shielded Noosa with his cloak. When the light finally faded, the shadows were gone. The entity had merged into the sanctuary itself. Only a faint, moving silhouette remained on the ceiling, alive, yet trapped. The black bird landed gently on Noosa's shoulder and vanished into thin air. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar that came before it. Gray dust settled over Noosa's hands, shoulders, and hair. The judge brushed his robe clean, though nothing could clean the tremor still clinging to his voice. The sanctuary did not pulse anymore. The breathing stone had gone still, but that did not mean it was dead. Noosa stared at the faint silhouette gliding slowly across the ceiling. A vast black shadow with edges that dissolved like smoke drifting underwater. It did not attack. It did not retreat. It simply watched. The judge finally spoke. "It hasn't disappeared. It just changed form." Noosa swallowed hard. "That shadow is the entity." "Yes, but weaker. Bound to the sanctuary." She stepped closer to the center, where only a faint imprint of the manuscript remained. An imprint like burned-in light. What happened to the manuscript? It returned to its place, the judge murmured. Or perhaps it became part of the sanctuary. That book was never truly ours. Nusa looked around. Everything felt strangely cleaner, yet older at the same time, like dust after a storm. The small creature, the witness, stood again, trembling. But this time its eyes were white instead of black, empty, as though something had left it. The judge knelt beside it. "It's done," he whispered gently. "You're free." The witness tilted its head, confused, then touched the ground with its long fingers. It traced shapes in the ash, circles, lines, spirals, then stopped suddenly. A soft hum vibrated through the room. Nusa backed away. "What now?" The judge stood slowly. "Now, we leave." The corridor behind them had changed. What once felt suffocating now lay still, quiet, almost inviting. Even the ash seemed to settle neatly on the floor, no longer forming restless spirals. As they walked, Nusa asked, "Why did the bird appear? What was it?" "A memory," he answered. "A fragment of the entity's own history. Something it lost long ago." She frowned. "So the bird was part of the entity?" "In a way," he said. "The entity once had form, purpose, clarity, but centuries in the darkness eroded it. It forgot what it was and became only hunger and shadow." Nusa shivered. "And the manuscript?" "It held the last pure memory of the entity, the part of it that was still light." They reached the end of the corridor. A faint slit of daylight leaked through a cracked archway ahead. The judge paused. "There is something you must understand," he said, voice low. "Knowledge is not meant to be owned. It is meant to be carried, passed, and treated with respect. The entity was not evil. It was imprisoned by its own forgotten truths." Nusa clenched her fists. "But we saved it, didn't we?" The judge did not answer immediately. He ran his fingers along the cracked wall, feeling the cold stone. "No one truly saves or destroys such things. We only shift their shape." They stepped out into the open air. A pale sun was rising behind the barren hills, the sky gray as smoke. Welcomed them silently, as though acknowledging the weight they carried inside. The judge inhaled deeply, savoring the fresh air. "Do you feel it?" he asked. Nusa nodded. "The silence, it's different." "Yes," he said. "The sanctuary's heartbeat has stopped, but ours continues." Nusa turned back toward the entrance. The shadow on the ceiling was gone from sight, but she still felt its presence, like a distant echo stored in her bones. "Will it return?" she asked. "Everything returns," the judge replied, "but in forms we do not always recognize." They walked further from the sanctuary, leaving behind the ancient stones and shifting shadows. For the first time, Nusa felt the world around her, as if seeing it anew. the wind brushing against her face, the loose gravel under her boots, the trembling light of dawn. "Tell me honestly," she said, "did the entity judge us?" The judge chuckled softly. "No, we judged ourselves in its presence. A flock of ordinary birds passed overhead. Nothing like the black bird of light, but real, tangible, alive." Noosa watched them disappear into the distance. "Do you think the bird will return too?" The judge smiled, sadly, knowingly. "It never left. It's inside you now." She held her breath. "What do you mean?" "The light you saw," he said. "The courage you found. The understanding you gained. These things don't vanish. They shape you." He looked toward the sanctuary one last time. The bird was never just a creature. It was the moment of clarity we all wait for. They continued walking until the sanctuary became a small silhouette in the distance. But its shadow, its lessons, its heartbeat, all remained inside. They walked in silence for a long time. The path descending from the sanctuary wound between broken stones and thorny shrubs. Every few steps, Noosa glanced behind her as though expecting the black bird's wings to unfurl again from the darkness. But the sanctuary remained still. The judge finally broke the silence. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Noosa nodded. "How can I not? That presence, it felt larger than life, larger than thought itself." "That is what ancient knowledge does," he replied. "It expands you, whether you want it to or not." They reached a bend in the narrow path. Below them lay a stretch of ruined ground where old structures once stood. Foundations of forgotten civilizations, swallowed by dust and time. Noosa stared down at the ruins. "All this, do you think it was connected to the sanctuary?" "Everything was connected once," the judge said. "But the connections were lost. Memories buried, stories twisted." He paused, leaning on his walking staff. "You must understand something, Noosa. This world has forgotten more than it remembers." She looked at the ruins again. "What do you think they were?" "Part of the old order," he answered. "Maybe guardians, maybe seekers. Maybe victims of the very knowledge they protected." Wind brushed against their clothes. Noosa wrapped her arms around herself. "Do you think the entity destroyed them?" "It's possible," the judge said, "but not in the way you imagine. Entities like that don't destroy cities with claws or fire." He tapped his temple. "They destroy them with ideas." She frowned. "Ideas?" "Yes," he said. "An idea too powerful, a truth too sharp, a memory too heavy." He stepped forward, motioning for her to follow. "When people are given something beyond their understanding, they break." They continued their descent. Soon they reached the edge of the ruins. Ancient stones lay scattered like bones, half buried in the earth. Faded carvings peeked through the dust, symbols spiraling inward like tunnels. Nusa knelt beside one of the stones. These markings, they look like the ones the witness drew. The judge nodded. Exactly. Which means the witness wasn't the first to communicate with the entity. Nusa touched the stone lightly. What happened to them? The old ones? They learned what was not meant for them, he said quietly. And knowledge without wisdom is a curse. A cold chill slipped down her spine. Is that what almost happened to us? The judge smiled faintly. Almost. But we stepped back before falling too deep. They moved among the collapsed structures, the judge scanning the ground with practiced eyes. Look here. Nusa approached. Half hidden beneath a slab of stone was a circular depression carved perfectly into the earth. A symbol almost identical to the one inside the sanctuary. The same sigil, she whispered. Yes, he said. This place was not separate from the sanctuary. It was part of a greater system, a network built to contain, channel, and possibly communicate with the entity. Nusa looked around at the destruction. It didn't work. Nothing lasts forever, he replied softly. Not even prisons made of knowledge. They stood in silence, the weight of the ancient world pressing down upon them. Then Nusa said quietly, "The bird, when it appeared, I felt something, like it saw me, not with eyes, but with memory." The judge nodded. That's how such entities perceive. They don't see shapes. They see truth, intent, desire. She hesitated. What did it see in me? He looked at her carefully. Enough light to mirror its own. That is why it did not harm you. She looked down at her hands. And in you? He chuckled softly. In me it saw time. Old time. Time that has walked too close to forbidden knowledge. They stood again at the threshold of what once was a city. The judge continued walking. Come, there is more you must understand. They left the ruins behind, following a narrow trail leading downhill. The air grew warmer, the sky brighter. The world felt alive again after the suffocating tension of the sanctuary. After some time, Nusa broke the silence. Why did the witness lose its black eyes? The entity receded, the judge said, and with it, the connection that tethered the witness to its memory. So, the witness is free? As free as anyone who has touched the unknown, he replied. It will carry traces. But it is no longer bound. Nusa sighed with relief. That creature, it didn't deserve what happened to it. No one does, he said. But sometimes guardians are shaped by sacrifice. She slowed her pace, considering his words. What will happen to the sanctuary now? It will sleep, he answered, as it has for centuries. And the shadow, he glanced at her. What shadow? The one watching from the ceiling, she whispered. Ah, he said, that was not the entity. That was the echo. Memory without substance, light without body. Is it dangerous? No, he said, but memory can become dangerous if awakened. They reached a quiet clearing filled with tall grass gently waving in the wind. The sun hung low above the horizon, casting a pale glow across the landscape. The judge sat on a stone, motioning for Nusa to join him. She sat. He took a deep breath. "There is one more truth you must hear," he said. Nusa braced herself. "What is it?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "You think we ended something inside that sanctuary?" "Yes," she said. "We didn't," he whispered. She froze. "We only ended one chapter," he continued. "But the entity, the memory, the bird, the shadow, all of it," he placed his hand over his chest, "is now inside you." Nusa felt her breath catch. "What do you mean inside me?" "You carried the manuscript. You faced the entity. You witnessed the bird of memory. You stepped into the circle of knowledge." He leaned closer. "You are now part of the story. And stories never die. They transform." Wind swept through the clearing, bending the grass around them like waves. Nusa whispered, "So, what happens now?" The judge smiled. "That," he said, "depends on how you carry the light." Nusa stood silently, absorbing the judge's words. The weight of them sank deep into her bones, like cold water creeping into stone. Inside her, the idea was terrifying, yet strangely illuminating. After a long pause, she spoke softly. "Why me? Why would it choose me?" The judge shook his head. "It didn't choose you. You chose yourself the moment you stepped into the sanctuary." She blinked. "I didn't choose anything. I was following you." He smiled. "And yet you walked first into the dark room. You touched the manuscript when I hesitated. You stood your ground when the entity revealed itself." He looked at her with a seriousness she had never seen before. "Courage is a kind of calling, and knowledge answers only those who dare." Nusa lowered her eyes. "I wasn't courageous. I was terrified." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," he said. "It's walking toward the truth, even while trembling." Wind brushed against her face, warm and gentle now. The darkness of the sanctuary felt far away, yet its echo pulsed faintly in her chest, as though something inside her had awakened and was quietly breathing. "What will happen to me now?" she asked. "That depends," he said. "Will you continue seeking? Or will you run from what you learned?" She looked out over the hills, the sanctuary a faint silhouette behind them. "I don't want to run." "Then you won't," he replied. They rose from the clearing and resumed walking. The path widened, leading toward a stretch of grasslands that shimmered beneath the rising sun. Nusa looked at the horizon. "Do you think others have gone through this? Anyone before me?" "Many," he said, "but not all endured it." "What happened to those who didn't?" Some lost themselves in the echoes. Some became obsessed with the bird, chasing visions until their minds fractured, and some became shadows of themselves. Noosa shuddered. And those who survived, they became bridges between two worlds, he said, between what humanity knows and what it fears to know. The path divided into two winding trails. Noosa paused, unsure which direction to take. The judge pointed toward the left. That way leads to the outer villages. It is safer, calmer. And the right? She asked. His eyes darkened. The right leads toward the forgotten valleys. Places where the boundaries grow thin, where knowledge flows freely, but at a price. Noosa took a breath. What would you choose? I've walked both paths, he said. Neither is easy. The left preserves your peace. The right sharpens your purpose. She studied the two trails. I'm not ready for the right path, she admitted. Then take the left, he said gently. There is no shame in choosing healing before seeking further truth. They began walking toward the left trail, but after a few steps, Noosa suddenly stopped. The judge turned. What is it? She touched her chest, right above her heartbeat. I felt something. A flutter. Describe it. Like wings. The judge exhaled slowly. That is the memory settling, he said. The bird's light adjusting to its new vessel. She closed her eyes. I can almost see it, hovering. He nodded. It will appear in dreams, visions, reflections. But do not fear it. It is guidance, not danger. Noosa opened her eyes again. I thought the entity was dangerous. The entity is dangerous, the judge said. But the bird is different. It is what the entity once was. Before fear, before hunger, before forgetting itself. She frowned. Wait. You said the bird was its memory. Yes. So now its memory is inside me. Yes. Then what remains of the entity? He glanced back toward the sanctuary. Enough to drift. Enough to watch. Enough to search for what it lost. Noosa felt a chill. You mean it will search for me? Not necessarily for you, but for its memory. Light always seeks what was taken from it. Her heart pounded. And what happens if it finds me? That, the judge said softly, depends on which part of you it finds. They continued walking. The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of grass and distant water. It felt grounding, pulling Noosa back from spiraling thoughts. After a long stretch of silence, she asked, You said the old city fell because they learned something they weren't ready for. What exactly did they learn? The judge hesitated. Truths about creation, he said finally. And destruction. Truths about perception, how the mind shapes reality. Truths about existence beyond material form. She frowned. That sounds philosophical. It was, he said. and also catastrophic. He looked up at the sky. When people discover something too large, too luminous, too raw, they try to contain it, tame it, control it. And that destroyed them. No, he said, their fear did. Noosa walked in thoughtful silence. So, the bird inside me, is it dangerous if I try to control it? Yes, he said, but even more dangerous if you ignore it. She stopped again. So what do I do? He stepped close, placing a hand on her shoulder. You learn. You listen, and you let the memory settle without forcing shape upon it. Noosa exhaled slowly. I can try. That is all that is required, he said. They moved deeper into the grasslands. The sunlight grew warmer and the sky clearer. The oppressive shadows of the sanctuary felt distant now, but not gone, because part of them walked with her. After some time, the judge spoke again. Do you want to hear the story of the first bird? Noosa turned to him. There was a first bird. Yes, he said. Long before the manuscript, long before the sanctuary, long before the witness. She leaned closer. Tell me. He nodded. I will. But understand, this is knowledge carried orally for centuries. A story passed from seeker to seeker, guardian to guardian. She sat on a flat stone by the path, waiting. The judge began. Ages ago, before cities, before scripts, before memory itself, there was a creature of light. It was not a bird then. It was simply a shape dash, a radiant consciousness drifting across the early world. She listened, entranced. This being, he continued, was the world's first curious observer. It witnessed creation unfold, and it remembered. It carried memory before memory existed. What happened to it? She whispered. It grew, he said. It learned. It gathered so much truth that its form became unstable, so it reshaped itself into something smaller, something graceful, something that could fly through layers of reality. A bird, she said softly. Yes. The first bird of memory, the ancestor of the entity you faced. Noosa's eyes widened. So the entity was once a being of pure light. He nodded. But light can fracture. Memory can erode. Knowledge can decay. She swallowed hard. And the manuscript? The last intact fragment of what it once knew. Noosa looked down at her hands. And now that fragment is inside me. Yes, the judge said. And what you do with it will determine the next chapter. Not just for you, but perhaps for the entity itself. She stared into the horizon. I'm not ready for such responsibility. No one ever is, he replied. Responsibility comes before readiness. Growth comes after. Noosa stood slowly. I want to learn. He smiled. Then your path begins now. The judge rose and dusted off his robe. We should keep moving. The villages aren't far, but night falls quickly in these regions. Nusa nodded, though her gaze lingered on the distant horizon. The weight inside her, that soft flutter of wings, that pulse of foreign memory, seemed to thrum stronger with every step. She walked beside him. After some time, she asked, "You said others before me carried echoes of the bird. What happened to them?" The judge kept his eyes on the path. Some became healers. Some became chroniclers. Some became wanderers carrying wisdom to places that needed it. And the rest? He hesitated. The rest were consumed. Cold wind brushed her skin. Consumed? How? By what they tried to understand, he answered quietly. Knowledge can be nourishment, but in excess, it becomes fire. Nusa fell silent, absorbing that. They moved past a cluster of dry bushes. Birds, ordinary ones, darted from branch to branch. Their chirping contrasted sharply with the silence of the black bird she had witnessed inside the sanctuary. She murmured, "Those birds, do they sense anything?" The judge looked at them. Animals sense imbalance. They may not understand it, but they feel it. Do you think they sense me? Perhaps, he said, but they will not fear you. The light within you is not malicious. She exhaled, relieved. So the entity, is it malicious? The judge shook his head. No. Malice requires intention. The entity acts through hunger, not spite. Through instinct, not decision. Nusa's brow furrowed. Like an animal? No, like a broken story. They walked further until the landscape began to shift. The ground sloped downward. Tall grass thinned. A narrow stream emerged, cutting softly through the earth. Nusa knelt by the water and dipped her hands into it. The chill sent a shock up her arms. The judge sat on a stone nearby. "You seem troubled," he said. She looked at her reflection in the flowing surface. For a moment, just a flicker dash. She thought she saw a shadow of wings behind her silhouette. She blinked. It vanished. "I keep thinking about the entity," she whispered. "About how it watched me. About how it felt. Familiar. That is memory echoing through you," he said. "You touched its essence. It touched yours." She trembled slightly. "Does that mean I'm changing?" "Yes," he said simply, slowly, carefully. "But change is inevitable." "What kind of change?" "One that depends on your choices." She looked at him with unease. "Are you saying I could become like the entity?" He shook his head. "No. But you may become a person who sees more than others, who feels more deeply, who hears the whispers of forgotten things." She swallowed. "That sounds burdened," he finished. She nodded. "All gifts carry burden, especially the unseen ones." He stood and extended his hand to her. Come, there is a village ahead, people to meet, stories to learn. Noosa took his hand and stood, but as they resumed walking, she couldn't help but ask, "Do the villagers know about the sanctuary?" "Some suspect," he said. "Few understand. None speak of it openly." "Why?" "Fear," he answered. "Old fear passed through generations." They walked in silence for several minutes. Then Noosa said, "If they knew what was inside, the bird, the entity, the witness, wouldn't they want to learn more?" "That curiosity is rare," he said with a slight smile. "Most people fear what they cannot categorize. They hide from the infinite." She glanced at him. "And you? Do you fear the infinite?" He chuckled faintly. "Only a fool does not fear it. I fear it, and I respect it. That is the balance." Noosa kicked a small stone along the path. "I don't know if I respect it. I still don't understand it." "You understand enough," he said. "You understand that knowledge is alive, that memory has form, that what was once light can fracture, that what was once whole can be lost." She looked down at her hands again. "And I understand that part of that light is inside me." "Yes." They reached a wooden bridge crossing the stream. The wood creaked beneath their steps. On the other side lay a small expanse of open land, flat earth dotted with simple huts, grazing animals, and a few figures moving in the distance. "The village," Noosa breathed. "Yes," the judge said, "a place of rest." But as they approached, something stirred inside her. A faint whisper, a flutter of wings in her chest, a sound she felt more than heard. She paused. The judge immediately noticed. "What do you feel?" "It's like the bird is warning me." He turned serious. "Warning you of what?" She swallowed. "I don't know. But something here is wrong." He scanned the village with narrowed eyes. "Describe the feeling." "It's like the air is too still, like the ground is holding its breath." The judge frowned. "That is not the bird," he said. "That is the entity." Her throat tightened. "You said the entity stayed in the sanctuary." "I said its weakened form stayed," he corrected. "A piece of it. But the rest, the instinct, the hunger." He pointed toward the village. "It follows memory." Noosa felt a chill colder than anything the sanctuary had ever held. "You mean?" "Yes," he said, voice low. "It followed you." She clenched her fists. "What do we do?" He looked at her steadily. "We face it, but not with fear." She breathed hard. "I'm scared." "So am I," he said, but he stepped forward. "Come. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning." Noosa stared at the village where shadows moved between huts. Too slow, too deliberate, too synchronized to be human. She swallowed her fear and followed him, Long ago, in a time when the world was still young and vast forests stretched beyond the horizon, there lived a boy named Raph. He was small in stature, with thin limbs and tousled hair, yet his presence felt larger than his size. His eyes shone with curiosity, a bright light that seemed to absorb the details of everything around him. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, the subtle movements in the underbrush that others would overlook. Raph's heart was drawn to the forest, not by adventure but by wonder. Every morning, as the sun spilled golden light through the trees, he would wander along streams and moss-covered rocks, observing the animals and listening to the stories that nature whispered. The elders of the tribe often warned Raph about the cave at the edge of the forest. "It is not a place for children," they would say. "It holds spirits older than the oldest trees. No one has returned from it unchanged." But Raph did not see danger in the cave. He saw history, waiting silently on the walls, waiting for someone to understand. There was a magnetic pull in the air around it, an invitation only he seemed to hear. One misty morning, when the forest was shrouded in a soft, silvery fog, Raph made his way to the cave entrance. The cold air brushed against his skin as he stepped cautiously inside, and the faint scent of earth and stone filled his senses. Shadows moved across the walls as he went deeper, shapes shifting as if the cave itself were alive. With each careful step, Raph's excitement grew, tempered by reverence. He felt he was entering a sacred space, one that had witnessed countless seasons and countless lives. Soon his eyes fell upon something remarkable. Ancient paintings on the walls, drawn in shades of ochre, charcoal, and clay. Humans hunted bears, gathered berries, celebrated life. Bears stood tall, powerful, and majestic, yet depicted in harmony with the people around them. Raph traced the lines with his fingers, imagining the hands that had painted them centuries ago. These images were not merely art, they were a story. They told of coexistence, respect, and understanding. The cave was a record of wisdom passed down from ancestors who had learned to live in balance with nature, a silent testament to harmony between humans and the creatures of the forest. Hours passed as Raph explored, his mind absorbing every detail. He marveled at the skill and care with which the paintings had been created, each stroke deliberate, each symbol full of meaning. The forest outside continued its quiet rhythm, but inside time seemed suspended. The deeper Raph ventured, the more he felt that he was not just observing history, he was a part of it. Then, as if the cave had been waiting for this very moment, Raph felt a presence. A massive bear stepped into the dim light. Its fur shimmered in the faint sunlight that penetrated the cave entrance. Its eyes, large and intelligent, met Raph's. The boy froze for a heartbeat, heart pounding in his chest. Yet the bear did not growl, nor did it charge. It simply observed, calm and imposing, a being of strength and presence that commanded respect. Raf too did not move. He held a carved stone he had picked up earlier, a small piece of rock etched with simple patterns, and felt as though it could communicate his intentions. In that moment, two worlds met. Raf understood that courage was not about fighting or running. It was about presence, awareness, and understanding. The bear, sensing the boy's respect, relaxed slightly and the tension in the cave shifted. Raf took a slow step forward, not with fear, but with quiet confidence. This was a meeting of equals, not enemies. From that day, Raf became different. He moved through the forest with new eyes, learning not just to survive, but to understand. He observed the movements of animals, noticed patterns in the wind, listened to the subtle shifts in the forest's rhythms. When he returned to his tribe, they noticed the change. The boy who had once been small and timid now carried a quiet authority, an awareness of the life around him that seemed to surpass even the elders' wisdom. Raf began sharing what he had learned. Children would follow him along the streams, listening as he pointed out the signs of animals, the rustle of leaves indicating movement, or the way birds reacted to unseen dangers. The elders, initially skeptical, began to respect his insights. They saw that Raf's courage lay not in strength, but in understanding. The ability to connect with life, to see beyond fear and find harmony. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of red and gold, Raf sat by the fire with the tribe. He placed the carved stone before them. Its surface depicted intertwined human and bear hands, a symbol of unity and respect. "This is not just a stone," he said softly, his voice steady despite the crowd's silence. "It is a reminder. We can live in balance with the creatures around us, not by force, but by understanding." The elders nodded and a calm settled over the camp. For the first time, stories of fear were replaced by stories of respect. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a melody of peace. Even the animals seemed to acknowledge the moment. The forest and the tribe existed together, each learning from the other, connected by understanding and trust. Raf's story became a legend, passed down through generations. Not as a tale of battles, but as a story of empathy, courage, and wisdom. The carved stone in the cave remained, worn smooth by the passage of time, a timeless symbol of harmony. Children who grew up hearing Raf's story learned that true strength was not in dominance, but in patience, observation, and the ability to understand and coexist with all living beings. Seasons passed, and Raf's presence in the forest grew stronger. Each day brought new lessons, not just for him, but for everyone around him. The tribe began to notice the subtle changes in the land, the way animals moved differently as Raf approached, and how the forest seemed to respond to his calm presence. The boy who once ran through the trees for fun now moved with purpose, quietly observing, learning, and teaching. Raf's connection with the forest went beyond observation. He began understanding the rhythms of life, how streams flowed, carrying signs of distant creatures, how the wind whispered warnings, how birds and insects communicated patterns that spoke of food, danger, and opportunity. His mind was like a mirror, reflecting the intelligence of the forest back to itself. Slowly, the tribe began following him, learning to walk lightly, to observe without disturbing, and to respect the delicate balance that existed everywhere. One crisp morning, Raf discovered a clearing near the river. The water shimmered in the first rays of sunlight, and mist hovered above the surface. A small group of deer grazed nearby, alert but unafraid. Raf knelt on the soft ground, studying the patterns of their movement. He noticed that the slightest shift in a branch or a whisper of wind could send them fleeing. Yet, when he remained still, they relaxed, allowing him to watch without intrusion. The lesson was clear. Patience and respect were more powerful than speed or force. It was in moments like these that Raf reflected on the cave paintings that had first inspired him. The ancients had understood what he was now learning firsthand. Strength was not about dominance. True power lay in awareness, in understanding the connections that linked every creature and every tree. Raf realized that his task was not merely survival, but stewardship. He was becoming a guardian, not of the tribe alone, but of the entire forest. One afternoon, Raf encountered a young bear cub separated from its mother. The cub whimpered softly, unsure and frightened. Raf approached slowly, speaking in gentle tones, moving deliberately to avoid startling it. He extended a hand and the cub sniffed, hesitant but curious. Over the course of several hours, Raf guided the cub through the forest, showing it safe paths, water, and shelter, until it finally reunited with its mother. The elders who witnessed the event were astonished. They saw that Raf's courage had no violence. His bravery was in connection, in understanding, in patience. The children of the tribe began following Raf more regularly. They learned to read the forest's signs as he did, and they learned lessons that would shape their own futures. "Look carefully," Raf would whisper, pointing at a bird's nest hidden among branches. "Notice how it balances itself, how the twigs are placed with care. Everything has a purpose if you observe closely." These teachings became part of the tribe's culture, ensuring that future generations would live in harmony with the forest. During the cold months when snow blanketed the trees and streams froze over, Raf taught the tribe how to move carefully, how to maintain warmth, and how to find sustenance without disturbing the delicate balance of life around them. He shared stories of the animals' cleverness, the strategies of the forest, and the wisdom of ancestors preserved in the cave paintings. Around the fire, children listened wide-eyed, inspired not by tales of violence or hunting alone, but by stories of coexistence, resourcefulness, and empathy. As years went by, Raf matured into a young man, though his heart remained gentle and curious. The elders often consulted him, not because he demanded authority, but because his understanding was profound. He had become a living bridge between humans and the forest, carrying the ancient wisdom of the cave into the present, ensuring that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the first stars appeared, Raph climbed to a hill overlooking the forest. The tribe was gathered below, their faces lit by the soft glow of the fire. He raised his hand and gestured to the vast trees, streams, and hills that stretched beyond the horizon. "This forest," he said, "is our home, our teacher, and our companion. If we listen, respect, and understand, it will provide for us. If we act with care, it will thrive, and so will we." The elders nodded, and the children repeated his words, absorbing the wisdom of the boy who had once wandered curiously into the cave, now a guardian and teacher. In that moment, Raph felt a quiet joy, a deep connection to everything around him. He had fulfilled a promise, not only to himself, but to the generations that would follow. Even the animals seemed to acknowledge his presence. Bears, deer, and birds moved with ease around the tribe. The forest thrummed with life, harmonious and serene, as if it recognized the boy who had chosen understanding over fear, patience over haste, and respect over dominance. As time flowed, Raph became a symbol of harmony for the tribe, not because he wielded power or fear, but because he embodied understanding. Every morning he would rise before the sun, walking barefoot on the damp earth, feeling the vibrations of the forest. The soil beneath his feet told stories of rainfall, of roots growing, of insects tunneling, and birds hunting. Raph listened as though the forest itself spoke through the subtle signs around him. One day, while exploring a rocky hillside near the river, Raph found an unusual stone formation. Each rock seemed to be deliberately placed, almost like a message left by time itself. He sat there for hours, observing the patterns in sunlight and shadow, imagining the ancient hands that had once touched these stones. He realized that the forest, like the cave paintings, was a living archive of history and wisdom. Every tree, every rock, every flowing stream carried knowledge waiting for those willing to observe. Children often followed Raph on these journeys, fascinated by his patience and attention. "Why do you watch the wind so closely?" one of them asked. Raph smiled. "Because it carries messages. Every rustle of leaves, every movement of the branches tells a story. If we do not listen, we miss the lessons of life." As Raph's influence grew, the tribe began adopting new practices inspired by his teachings. They planted more trees, avoided disturbing animal homes, and learned to gather food sustainably. Hunting became a ritual of respect rather than necessity. Even during scarcity, the tribe thrived because Raph had taught them to observe patterns, anticipate change, and work in harmony with the forest rather than against it. One evening, Raph climbed a large boulder overlooking the valley. The golden sunset illuminated the forest in warm hues, and the river glittered like molten silver. He looked down at the tribe below, sitting quietly around their fire. Children laughed softly, elders shared stories, and even a few young bears, curious and unafraid, roamed the nearby woods. Raph felt an immense peace, realizing that his journey from curious boy to teacher had created a living legacy. Yet, Raph never grew complacent. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to learn. A sudden storm, an unexpected flood, a change in animal migration. Each moment was a test of observation, patience, and empathy. He guided his people not with authority but with example. By watching him, they learned the subtleties of the forest, the delicate balance that ensured survival for all its inhabitants. One snowy morning, Raph discovered a small bear cub struggling on a thin patch of ice above the river. Its mother was nowhere in sight, and the cub trembled in fear. Raph approached cautiously, speaking softly, lowering himself to the cub's level. Slowly, he extended a hand, allowing the cub to feel safety. Over time, the mother bear returned, and Raph guided them both to a safe area where they could find food and shelter. The tribe, watching from a distance, learned again that courage was not about force or domination, but about careful, compassionate action. As years turned into decades, Raph grew older, yet his energy for observation and teaching never waned. The tribe continued to flourish, and their stories began to spread to neighboring groups. Tales of the boy who listened to the forest, who connected with bears, birds, and the earth itself, inspired others to live with respect for all living things. Raph often returned to the cave where his journey had begun. The ancient paintings seemed brighter, more alive than ever. He realized that the cave was not merely a relic of the past, but a living classroom. Generations of children would come to see, touch, and learn, bridging the gap between history and the present. Each handprint, each image of a bear or a hunt, told lessons of patience, observation, and empathy. Lessons that Raph embodied every day of his life. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and stars began to shimmer, Raph stood on the highest hill near the village. He gazed at the vast forest, feeling the heartbeat of the land beneath him. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the voices of generations. The ancestors who had walked the same paths, the animals who had shared the forest with humans, and the children who would continue the legacy. Raph understood that life was a circle, a story written across time, and that his role was simply to listen, learn, and guide. He knelt down, placing a carved stone in the soil, a symbol of harmony, wisdom, and connection. Around him, the tribe watched in reverent silence. Raph's journey, which had begun with curiosity and wonder, had become a lasting testament to the power of observation, empathy, and respect. And so the story of Raph, the boy who bridged worlds endured, not in battles or victories, but in the quiet strength of understanding, the gentle wisdom of patience, and the enduring bond between humans and the living world around them. His legacy was not only remembered in stories and stones, but felt in every rustle of leaves, every ripple in the stream, and every heartbeat of the forest he loved so dearly. In a time long ago when the forest stretched endlessly and rivers carved paths through the valleys like veins of life, there was a boy named Raph. He was small, curious, and full of wonder, yet he carried a heart braver than anyone could imagine. From the moment he could walk, Raph roamed the woods, fascinated by every sound, every shadow, and every creature that stirred among the trees. The elders often watched him, shaking their heads at his audacity. "He will get lost," they murmured. But Raph never truly felt lost. The forest spoke to him, not in words, but in whispers of leaves, the patterns of animal tracks, the rustle of the wind. He felt connected, as though the earth itself had chosen him to observe, learn, and understand. One day, while exploring a dense thicket near the river, Raph stumbled upon a hidden cave. Its entrance was narrow and dark, yet it beckoned him. Inside, the walls were covered with paintings, bears, hunters, rivers, and trees, depicted with precision and care. Raph ran his fingers across the rough stone, imagining the lives of the people who had created these images thousands of years ago. Every figure, every symbol, told the story of survival, courage, and wisdom. Days turned into weeks, and Raph returned to the cave repeatedly. He began copying the drawings, not with paint, but by observing and memorizing them, committing every line, every pattern to his mind. He realized that these depictions were lessons, reminders of how to live with respect, how to understand the creatures of the forest, and how to navigate its challenges with intelligence and care. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden shadows through the trees, Raph sat outside the cave, pondering the animals he had observed that day. A bear lumbered across a distant ridge, its presence commanding respect. Raph watched, understanding that strength was not only in power but in knowledge, awareness, and timing. This realization marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, a journey of growth, understanding, and subtle courage. Seasons passed, and Raph's presence in the forest grew stronger. Each day brought new lessons, not just for him, but for everyone around him. The tribe began to notice the subtle changes in the land, the way animals moved differently as Raph approached, and how the forest seemed to respond to his calm presence. The boy who once ran through the trees for fun now moved with purpose, quietly observing, learning, and teaching. Raph's connection with the forest went beyond observation. He began understanding the rhythms of life, how streams flowed, carrying signs of distant creatures, how the wind whispered warnings, how birds and insects communicated patterns that spoke of food, danger, and opportunity. His mind was like a mirror, reflecting the intelligence of the forest back to itself. Slowly, the tribe began following him, learning to walk lightly, to observe without disturbing, and to respect the delicate balance that existed everywhere. One crisp morning, Raph discovered a clearing near the river. The water shimmered in the first rays of sunlight, and mist hovered above the surface. A small group of deer grazed nearby, alert but unafraid. Raph knelt on the soft ground, studying the patterns of their movement. He noticed that the slightest shift in a branch or a whisper of wind could send them fleeing. Yet, when he remained still, they relaxed, allowing him to watch without intrusion. The lesson was clear. Patience and respect were more powerful than speed or force. It was in moments like these that Raph reflected on the cave paintings that had first inspired him. The ancients had understood what he was now learning firsthand. Strength was not about dominance. True power lay in awareness, in understanding the connections that linked every creature and every tree. Raph realized that his task was not merely survival, but stewardship. He was becoming a guardian not of the tribe alone, but of the entire forest. One afternoon, Raph encountered a young bear cub separated from its mother. The cub whimpered softly, unsure and frightened. Raph approached slowly, speaking in gentle tones, moving deliberately to avoid startling it. He extended a hand and the cub sniffed, hesitant but curious. Over the course of several hours, Raph guided the cub through the forest, showing it safe paths, water, and shelter, until it finally reunited with its mother. The elders who witnessed the event were astonished. They saw that Raph's courage had no violence. His bravery was in connection, in understanding, in patience. The children of the tribe began following Raph more regularly. They learned to read the forest's signs as he did. And they learned lessons that would shape their own futures. "Look carefully," Raph would whisper, pointing at a bird's nest hidden among branches. "Notice how it balances itself, how the twigs are placed with care. Everything has a purpose if you observe closely." These teachings became part of the tribe's culture, ensuring that future generations would live in harmony with the forest. During the cold months when snow blanketed the trees and streams froze over, Raph taught the tribe how to move carefully, how to maintain warmth, and how to find sustenance without disturbing the delicate balance of life around them. He shared stories of the animals' cleverness, the strategies of the forest, and the wisdom of ancestors preserved in the cave paintings. Around the fire, children listened wide-eyed, inspired not by tales of violence or hunting alone, but by stories of coexistence, resourcefulness, and empathy. As years went by, Raph matured into a young man, though his heart remained gentle and curious. The elders often consulted him, not because he demanded authority, but because his understanding was profound. He had become a living bridge between humans and the forest, carrying the ancient wisdom of the cave into the present, ensuring that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. One evening, as the sky turned violet and the first stars appeared, Raph climbed to a hill overlooking the forest. The tribe was gathered below, their faces lit by the soft glow of the fire. He raised his hand and gestured to the vast trees, streams, and hills that stretched beyond the horizon. "This forest," he said, "is our home, our teacher, and our companion. If we listen, respect, and understand, it will provide for us. If we act with care, it will thrive, and so will we." The elders nodded, and the children repeated his words, absorbing the wisdom of the boy who had once wandered curiously into the cave, now a guardian and teacher. In that moment, Raph felt a quiet joy, a deep connection to everything around him. He had fulfilled a promise, not only to himself, but to the generations that would follow. Even the animals seemed to acknowledge his presence. Bears, deer, and birds moved with ease around the tribe. The forest thrummed with life, harmonious and serene, as if it recognized the boy who had chosen understanding over fear, patience over haste, and respect over dominance. As time flowed, Raph became a symbol of harmony for the tribe, not because he wielded power or fear, but because he embodied understanding. Every morning he would rise before the sun, walking barefoot on the damp earth, feeling the vibrations of the forest. The soil beneath his feet told stories of rainfall, of roots growing, of insects tunneling and birds hunting. Raph listened as though the forest itself spoke through the subtle signs around him. One day, while exploring a rocky hillside near the river, Raph found an unusual stone formation. Each rock seemed to be deliberately placed, almost like a message left by time itself. He sat there for hours, observing the patterns in sunlight and shadow, imagining the ancient hands that had once touched these stones. He realized that the forest, like the cave paintings, was a living archive of history and wisdom. Every tree, every rock, every flowing stream carried knowledge waiting for those willing to observe. Children often followed Raph on these journeys, fascinated by his patience and attention. "Why do you watch the wind so closely?" one of them asked. Raph smiled. "Because it carries messages. Every rustle of leaves, every movement of the branches tells a story. If we do not listen, we miss the lessons of life." As Raph's influence grew, the tribe began adopting new practices inspired by his teachings. They planted more trees, avoided disturbing animal homes, and learned to gather food sustainably. Hunting became a ritual of respect rather than necessity. Even during scarcity, the tribe thrived because Raph had taught them to observe patterns, anticipate change, and work in harmony with the forest rather than against it. One evening, Raph climbed a large boulder overlooking the valley. The golden sunset illuminated the forest in warm hues, and the river glittered like molten silver. He looked down at the tribe below, sitting quietly around their fire. Children laughed softly, elders shared stories, and even a few young bears, curious and unafraid, roamed the nearby woods. Raph felt an immense peace, realizing that his journey from curious boy to teacher had created a living legacy. Yet Raph never grew complacent. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to learn. A sudden storm, an unexpected flood, a change in animal migration. Each moment was a test of observation, patience, and empathy. He guided his people not with authority, but with example. By watching him, they learned the subtleties of the forest, the delicate balance that ensured survival for all its inhabitants. One snowy morning, Raph discovered a small bear cub struggling on a thin patch of ice above the river. Its mother was nowhere in sight, and the cub trembled in fear. Raph approached cautiously, speaking softly, lowering himself to the cub's level. Slowly he extended a hand, allowing the cub to feel safety. Over time, the mother bear returned, and Raph guided them both to a safe area where they could find food and shelter. The tribe, watching from a distance, learned again that courage was not about force or domination, but about careful, compassionate action. As years turned into decades, Raph grew older, yet his energy for observation and teaching never waned. The tribe continued to flourish, and their stories began to spread to neighboring groups. Tales of the boy who listened to the forest, who connected with bears, birds, and the earth itself, inspired others to live with respect for all living things. Raph often returned to the cave where his journey had begun. The ancient paintings seemed brighter, more alive than ever. He realized that the cave was not merely a relic of the past, but a living classroom. Generations of children would come to see, touch, and learn, bridging the gap between history and the present. Each handprint, each image of a bear or a hunt, told lessons of patience, observation, and empathy. Lessons that Raph embodied every day of his life. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and stars began to shimmer, Raph stood on the highest hill near the village. He gazed at the vast forest, feeling the heartbeat of the land beneath him. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the voices of generations. The ancestors who had walked the same paths, the animals who had shared the forest with humans, and the children who would continue the legacy. Raph understood that life was a circle, a story written across time, and that his role was simply to listen, learn, and guide. He knelt down, placing a carved stone in the soil, a symbol of harmony, wisdom, and connection. Around him, the tribe watched in reverent silence. Raph's journey, which had begun with curiosity and wonder, had become a lasting testament to the power of observation, empathy, and respect. And so the story of Raph, the boy who bridged worlds, endured. not in battles or victories, but in the quiet strength of understanding, the gentle wisdom of patience, and the enduring bond between humans and the living world around them. His legacy was not only remembered in stories and stones, but felt in every rustle of leaves, every ripple in the stream, and every heartbeat of the forest he loved so dearly. As the years unfolded, Raf's life became a rhythm of observation and quiet discovery. Each morning before the first light touched the treetops, he would rise and walk through the frost-kissed grass. Tiny footprints marked his path, sometimes those of a fox, sometimes a deer, and sometimes the faint drag of his own shoes over soft soil. Each step was deliberate, a conversation with the earth,